Welcome back to Rich Words Music, where today we're trying to find the best Telecaster for under $200, euros or pounds. And for doing that, we're comparing this, the brand new Squier Sonic Telecaster in California Blue, against this, the Harley Benton TE-62CC in Lake Placid Blue. These are both Telecaster styles of guitars. This is from Squier by Fender, and this one is by Thoman's house brand, Harley Benton. They're two of the best affordable teles out there, but which one is better? Now, for years, if you wanted a cheap tele, you'd go for something like a Squier, and before the Sonic series, we had the Bullet series and the Affinity series too. But in recent years, brands like Harley Benton have come along with great cheap options, which have kind of forced brands like Squier and Fender and the other kind of institutionalized brands to up their game to compete. So the Squier Sonic Tele will set you back about 180 euros or just under $200, while the Harley Benton TE-62CC is around $150 or euros. So what do you get for your money? Which is more worth it? Which sounds more like a tele? Which is better value for money at the end of the day? I'm going to try and answer all of those questions in this video, and we're also going to play the guitars in as many different musical styles as possible. But first, I'm going to tell you about the specifications and the features of both of these guitars, and we'll start with the Squier Sonic Telecaster. So this is the Squier Sonic Telecaster in California Blue, and when I saw the Sonic series released in summer 2023, I knew I was probably going to end up owning at least one of the guitars from that range, and this is the first. It ticks almost all of my personal boxes with a new guitar, because it's a Telecaster, because it's really cheap, and because it's blue as well. I'm a fickle person. Those were the three things that I looked out for straight away, and I had high hopes for this guitar. The California Blue finish is lovely. I love the way it plays off against that white scratch plate. Fantastic aesthetics for me, sold it straight away. Underneath the California Blue finish though, we have a poplar body, which is a decent body wood for a tele, and the body of the Sonic Teles is thinner than that of a Fender Telecaster by about 1/4 of an inch. Squier saves money that way, and they also save in wood too. Now, apart from that, we have a pretty traditional Telecaster layout on the body here. We've got two Squier-designed pickups, and I've been told that these pickups are also featured on the more expensive Squier Affinity guitars, so that's a good sign as well. We have a three-way selector switch to move between the pickups, a master volume control, and a master tone control, and all of this hardware is chrome. The last thing on the body is the bridge here. This is a 6-saddle Telecaster bridge. Now, a 6-saddle bridge is more of a modern bridge. Traditional Telecasters you might expect to have a 3-saddle bridge, as you get on the Harley Benton, for example, but you have an advantage of having 6 saddles. That means that you can intonate and set the action and the height of each string individually with this guitar. Now, this being a Squier Sonic Telecaster, it's also top-loaded, so you load new strings through the bridge here instead of loading them through the body. This is not a string through body guitar. The Harley Benton is. So that's another difference right there. Now, if we move up to the neck of the Squier Sonic Tele, we've got 21 narrow tall frets on an Indian laurel fingerboard, and we also have a satin finished maple neck, which is really smooth. It feels great in the hand. It's a C shape, and it's medium to almost a little bit chunky in terms of size, which is quite different to what Fender says on their website. Fender tell us that it's a slim, inviting neck, and it is a very inviting neck, but it's chunkier than they would suggest. Now, the scale length is a Telecaster approved 648 millimeters. That's 25.5 inches. We have a 42 millimeter plastic nut here, and the fingerboard radius, that's the curvature of the fingerboard, is 9.5 inches. So it's not too flat and shreddy, not too rounded either. Perfect for any style of music, from playing chords down here to playing solos all the way up at the dusty end of the fretboard. Now, moving up to the headstock, we've got that traditional Squier Fender Telecaster shape, and on the back, 6-in-line Telecaster style tuners. So that's the 2023 Squier Sonic Telecaster at 180 euros or about $200. Let's move over and look at the specs of the Harley Benton TE-62CC. And this is the Harley Benton TE-62CC in Lake Placid Blue, or at least it's Harley Benton's take on Lake Placid Blue. If you know your Fender colours, you'll see that they didn't quite get this right. It's not as vibrant or as sparkly or as bright as a traditional Lake Placid Blue. It is its own thing. It looks cool anyway, and it has a mint green scratch plate that I think looks really, really nice as well. So underneath the Lake Placid Blue finish on the Harley Benton, we have a basswood body, also a decent standard body for Telecaster types of guitars, and again we have a a very traditional looking front of the body here. So we've got two Telecaster style pickups, and these are by Roswell. They're Alnico 5 pickups. The pickups in the Squier are ceramic, so if that's something that interests you, then perhaps we'll hear those differences in the playing part of the video later. We also have a 3-way selector switch and your master volume and tone control, and here we have a 3-saddle bridge on the Harley Benton. All of the hardware on the Harley Benton is HB Thomann no-name stuff. On the back of the body, you can see that we have a string-through body operation. Some people would say that having string-through bodies gives you more sustain in terms of your tone. Perhaps we'll hear that in the playing part too. Now, the body of this Harley Benton model is just slightly thicker than that of the Squier, but still thinner than your standard Fender Telecaster guitars would have. Moving up to the neck on the Harley Benton, and we have a beautiful, really, really nice feeling and looking roasted maple or caramelized maple neck on the back and on the front too. So the fingerboard is also caramelized or roasted maple. Again, we have 21 frets. Harley Benton don't tell us what size the frets are, but to me they feel very standard. They're probably medium jumbo. The fingerboard on this guitar is much flatter than that of the Squier. This is 305 millimeters, which is about 12 inches, similar to a Les Paul, so very flat indeed. The shape of the neck is also different to the Squier. The Harley Benton has a slimmer D-shaped neck, so the two necks feel, look, and operate very differently to one another. The scale lengths are the same though, 25.5 inches or 648 millimeters, and we also have a 42 millimeter plastic nut on the Harley Benton. And moving up to the caramelized maple headstock, again, 6 in line, no name Harley Benton tuners. So that's the TE-62CC, and this is the Squier Sonic Telecaster. And what we're going to do now is play these two guitars in as many different musical styles and settings as we can possibly do to hear how different and in fact how similar they sound. So my rig for today is going to be my Hughes & Kettner Black Spirit 200 amp head. We'll start on the Amps Clean channel, we'll play some poppy stuff, some folk and some country and some blues. Then we'll kick on the Crunch channel of the amp and play some classic rock and some indie. That's where I spend a lot of my personal time playing with Tele-type guitars, so hopefully these two are both going to sound good for that. Then we'll go up to the Amps Lead channel, play some harder rock, some punk rock and maybe some progressive rock as well. And after that we'll go back to the Amps Clean channel. I'll engage my Rev G3 distortion pedal, we'll tune these two cheap tellies down to drop D and see if they can do a bit of chugging. And after that I will give you some more thorough opinions on these guitars, telling you what I think about them in a bit more detail. Enough talk for now though, let's play the Harley Benton TE-62CC and the Squier Sonic Telecaster, and we'll speak in more detail about them afterwards. Okay then, so that was the Harley Benton TE-62CC up against the Squier Sonic Telecaster, and I hope you enjoyed the playing and the tones. And now what I want you to do is leave me a comment telling me which of the two you thought sounded better. Really interested to hear which you prefer because the two guitars do sound quite different. What I want to do now though is tell you what I think about each of the guitars in the different facets that you might be thinking about when you're considering buying a new Telecaster type guitar. So if you've got $200 or euros in the bank and you're looking to buy a new Telecaster type of instrument, I really do think that the Sonic Tele and the TE-62CC are going to be sort of up there on the top of your list, and there's going to be a number of things that you're going to look at when deciding which one you want to buy. So we'll go through those in order now. And I think the first thing you're going to probably look at is prices, and so we've got about $200 or 180 euros for the Squier Sonic Telecaster versus about 150 euros for the Harley Benton. Now the Harley Benton of course costs considerably more if you ship it to North America or somewhere else in the world, but the base prices of the two guitars, they're fairly similar, but actually the Squier costs a little bit more. And so what we're going to have to say is that in terms of purely price perspective, the Harley Benton wins, and we're going to have to see if the Squier is worth the extra money as we go through the rest of the comparison. So the next thing I think you want to look at is looks, and this is going to be totally subjective, but for me there can be only one winner here, and that is the Squier Sonic Telecaster. I love this California blue look, I love the white scratch plate, I love a dark fingerboard as well. I would prefer to have rosewood of course, but you can't expect that at this kind of a price. And the Indian laurel board here is not too dry and it's fairly dark as well. I can make it even darker if I put some fretboard oil on it. So this guitar looks fantastic to me, and I think that's a really important thing when you're talking about buying a cheap guitar or possibly your first ever guitar. If a guitar inspires you in the way it looks, it makes you want to pick it up and play it, and what more can you say about a cheap instrument than that? Now I think the Harley Benton looks decent, but they got the Lake Placid blue a bit wrong. I do really like the roasted maple neck and the fingerboard, but for me personally in terms of looks, this is where it's at. So the Squier wins in the looks department. And I think the next thing you'd look at would be the build quality and the feel of the guitars. And when you're paying under $200 or euros for an instrument, the key thing that you're thinking when you order it, when you're about to pick it up, is I hope there's nothing wrong with it. I hope there's no chips in the paint. I hope the neck is decent and the frets are all right. I hope the action and the intonation are okay. And on both of these guitars, everything was basically fantastic, especially when you consider the price point. Now these guitars, as well as every other new electric guitar, could and would benefit from a thorough setup by a competent technician. They would take it up a few percentage points in terms of playability. But straight out of the box, I bought both of these guitars online and they were delivered to me, and I played them in the first videos with them as they were out of the boxes, and they both felt fantastic. I've got the Squier in my hand now and I can tell you that the neck on this feels lovely. The frets have been done well, the action and the intonation are decent. In terms of the bodywork and the bodywood and the paint job, nothing to report as a problem whatsoever. Everything does its job as well. The hardware is decent, the tuners are decent too, and I can say exactly the same about the Harley Benton as well. There have been no problems with that guitar whatsoever. Everything has worked, everything has done its job. There have been no cosmetic blemishes worth noting or anything like that. You can't expect complete perfection at this price point, or indeed at any price point when it it comes to electric guitars these days. But you know, these guitars for under 200 bucks, very decent value for money, very decent in terms of the build quality too. And so when it comes to picking a winner in terms of build quality, I'd say these guitars are about the same. And because the Harley Benton's about 30 bucks cheaper, then it's going to have to win in that regard. There's one other thing that we need to talk about when it comes to the build quality of these guitars, and that's the weight of them both. They're actually very, very similar. So the Squier, this specific guitar, is 3.36 kilograms. That's about 7 pounds 6 and a bit. And the Harley Benton is 3.4 kilograms, which is 7 pounds 7 and a bit. So they're both decent weights. They don't feel like toys like some really cheap guitars can. They're not overly heavy either, which some affordable guitars can also be. And I think in that regard, they're both very decent pieces of wood. They both feel great. They both balance really well, whether you're standing up using a guitar strap or whether you're sitting down. And in terms of weights, both very, very decent. And finally, in the build quality, I mentioned the feel earlier, and I do have to say that there's something just a little bit more elegant feeling about the Harley Benton's roasted maple neck. It just feels a little bit more expensive in the hand. So we're going to give the build quality, the weight, and the feel of the guitars to the Harley Benton on that front. Now after that, what we're going to talk about is the playability of the guitars and the necks. And this is where we see some of the biggest differences, because the Squier definitely has a much chunkier maple neck with an Indian laurel board, and the Harley Benton has a slimmer D-shaped neck with a much flatter fingerboard. And I think what we can take from this is that the Squier is definitely going to be more suited to players who are more traditional in their thinking, and the Harley Benton is definitely going to be more suited to players who like skinnier, more modern, fast feeling necks. This is also a totally personal thing. Now for me personally, I tend to prefer a slightly chunkier neck. I really like a C shape, and I really like it to feel kind of like this. Most of my favorite guitars have a 9.5 or 10-inch fingerboard radius, so really the Squier Sonic Tele hits the bullseye for me in terms of the neck's playability. So it wins on that front, but the rest of the playability, the two guitars are pretty much neck and neck. They're both Teles. The Harley Benton doesn't have the exact Tele shape or dimensions, of course, because it can't, but it's pretty much dead on. They're both fairly decent in terms of upper fret access. They've both got decent necks and decent setups. Of course, like I said, this would be made better with a decent technician setting them up as well. But in terms of playability, there are no hindrances on either guitar, and because I prefer the neck on the Squier Sonic Tele, that's going to get the win when it comes to playability for me personally. And the next thing we have to look at is that other crucial thing, and that is the sounds of the guitars. Which sounds better? And again, we had some strong and significant differences in the tonal departments too. Now when we hooked up the guitars at first and played the clean channel, you could straight away hear that the Roswell pickups in the Harley Benton, those Alnico 5 pickups, have a lot more sparkly high end, and it was actually very glassy, and in direct comparison to the Squier, it sort of feels like a bit too much. Of course you can wind that back with the tone control, but just for reference, I had the volume and tone controls on both guitars up at 10 the whole time, just so we could really get that A-B comparison going. So in terms of the clean channel, I actually preferred the Squier on the bridge pickup. It did that Tele thing, both guitars do that Tele thing, don't get me wrong, but I preferred the tones from the Squier. It was a different story with the neck pickup. In my individual video about this guitar, I did say that I think the neck pickup is quite weak, and you can hear it in comparison to the Roswells in the Harley Benton. The Harley Benton's neck pickup has just a little bit more sparkle and life and vivaciousness to it. It just is a bit more living, and for that reason on the clean channel, I preferred the Harley Benton on the middle and neck pickup selections. It changed again when we went up to the crunch settings. When we did the classic rock and the indie as well, I sort of thought that the Squier had a fatter sound. The Harley Benton sounded a little bit more scooped to me. It had a little bit more high end and a little bit more low end too. They're both great sounds, and again, this is down to what you personally prefer, but for me the Squier was where it was at. When we went up to the lead channel of the amp and started playing the punk rock and the harder rock stuff, I noticed that the Squier's bridge pickup was starting to sound fatter than that of the Roswell in the Harley Benton, and that was something that really sounded good to me. I thought that both pickups acquitted themselves really well for stuff like pop punk. They're both very clear, they have a lot of clarity in full chords and in power chords too. They're both great for chugging as well, so that's really, really nice to hear. But for me personally, I was preferring the overall fatness and thickness of the Squier over the Roswells. And I had the same story when we tuned down to drop D and did the metal stuff as well. Again, the Squier just sounded fatter. Now I actually think that probably some of you watching this will prefer the Roswells in the Harley Benton, because it does give you just a little bit more direct attack than the Squier. It's a slightly tighter to pickup in that sense. But for me personally, the fatness of the Squier's Squier pickups was where it was at for this. Again though, I do just want to say that I played a couple of riffs on the neck pickup with higher gain, and again you could notice that the Harley Benton's neck pickup has a lot more life to it than that of the Squier. So overall then, in terms of sounds, it's quite a tough one to answer, and it will be a personal answer to everybody watching this. For me personally, in terms of sounds, for the bridge pickup, I would certainly pick the Squier. For the neck pickup, I would pick the Harley Benton. But if I was only to be able to pick one of the guitars that I could use, I would pick the Squier, because overall for me, 99% of the time I'm on the bridge pickup, and it just sounded better for my personal use cases. Although of course, your mileage may vary. And again, tell me in the comments which guitar you think sounded better. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think. And now we reach that final all-important conclusion of the video where I sort of tell you which guitar I think is better and which is better value for money. Well, if we look back at the things we've just talked about, the price, the looks, the build quality, the feel, the playability and the necks, the sounds, I feel that the Squier has won most of those key categories. The Harley Benton's cheaper, so it wins there. For me personally, the Squier wins out in the looks department, but that's totally subjective, of course. In terms of the build quality and the feel, I thought that the Harley Benton's roasted maple neck just edges that category for me, also because that guitar is cheaper. And then when it comes to the playability in the neck, even though the neck doesn't feel as elegant on the Squier, I prefer the Squier. Again, that's a subjective thing. And the sounds too, totally subjective again, but for me personally, the Squier is where it's at for most of the music that I personally happen to play. So all of those things considered, I think you probably know what I'm going to say. Yes, I personally feel that for me, the Squier Sonic Telecaster is the better guitar, even though it costs a little bit more money. And that's actually kind of a surprise to me, because I had played bullet Telecasters for many years. I've played a bunch of Squier Affinity guitars as well, the more expensive range. And I have to say that when the TE-62CC came out, and when other Harley Benton guitars have come out in the past few years, they've been really, really good. And they've been cheaper than most Squiers too. And I think that brands like Harley Benton have really forced some of the established giants like Squier to pick up their game and to kick up their ideas, because with Harley Benton making such great guitars, the big brands, they can't rely on their names anymore, and they actually have to make guitars that compete with the new upcoming upstarts like Harley Benton. Otherwise, at some point they're going to get left behind. And I really think that the Squier Sonic range has done a great job of sort of reclaiming the king of the budget end of the electric guitar world. It is very close though, and the Harley Benton is a fantastic instrument in its own right, and I think if you were to go for one of those, you would not be disappointed in any way, shape or form. But of course, only you know what is going to be better for you. So if you have the chance, try out the Squier, try out the Harley Benton for yourself, and buy the one which suits you best personally. You can watch 1,000 videos, but pick up a guitar for 10 seconds and you know if it sings for you. But at the very end of the day, these are both fantastic instruments at a very, very affordable price point. So whether you're a beginner player or just someone who wants a bit of cheap tele action in their lives, they're both fantastic choices, and I'm really, really happy that I happen to own both of them. Now, I hope that this video has answered all of the questions that you might have had about the Squier Sonic Telecaster or the Harley Benton TE-62CC. Remember, there are full, thorough, dedicated videos for each of these guitars elsewhere on my channel if you'd like to watch those as well. And if you've got any questions, if there's anything else you'd like to know, drop me a line down in the comments and I shall answer everything to the very best of my ability. And if you're still around, it would make my day if you fancied liking the video or even subbing to my channel, because that really does help. But that's been it for today's video. I've been Rich for Rich Words Music, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.